Hey, Daily Dosers, this is Pastor Larry here, and we're taking a look at God's Hall of Faith for a couple of weeks. The men and women in Hebrews chapter 11 that are spelled out as examples of what it means to walk by faith. Now, I pointed out in an earlier dose that it is simply trusting God enough to do what He says because we believe He exists and because we believe He rewards. Now, another one of the folks that doesn't get a lot of attention in this chapter is a guy named Enoch, and it makes sense he doesn't get a lot of attention. He's just briefly mentioned twice in the Old Testament, and just a short sentence or so in Genesis chapter 5, we're told he walked with God and then he was no more. And so when the writer of Hebrews is putting this list together, he starts out with a guy named Abel who was killed for doing the right thing. Then he moves to a guy named Enoch that we don't know much about. And then he moves on to Noah, Abraham, and some of the typical heroes that we often hear a lot about. But here's the thing that I notice about Enoch, and let me read what he says about him in verse 5. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He lived and God took him home. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. Now, notice this about Enoch. We've got a kind of cool story. God just says, you don't have to die. You just come straight to heaven. But other than that, we have no idea. What did he do to please God? And when I think about him, I think of him as one who kind of pleases God in the shadows. Oh, we'd all love to be a Noah, a Abraham, a Moses, an Apostle Paul, a Peter. But most of us, we're just Enochs. Our story is just lived out between us and God, our family, our community, and not much more. And yet we are just as much heroes in God's Hall of Faith as those who have incredible things happen. I was working with a group of pastors one time, and one of the guys mentioned that whenever you're trying to lead a church or plant a church or whatever, we all have visions every time we read Old Testament stories that we're Moses or we're Paul or we're Peter. But in reality, we don't get to choose to be Paul, Peter, Moses, Noah, Abraham. God gets to choose who we are and where we live. And many of us live that life in the shadows, not known, not doing great things in the eyes of other people, but equally great things in the eyes of God. You see, Enoch, whatever he did in walking in obedience, walked in such a way that God says, you have lived pleasing me. And he has this one out of all humanity story where God just says, come on up. That's not going to be your reward. That's not going to be my reward. But the principle of pleasing God in the shadows is incredibly important. Walk by faith. And play your life for an audience of one. For that one, our Lord, is the only one that really matters. The applause of man, the praise of other people, that's fleeting. The praise of God lasts forever. You and I can live the same kind of life as those who are in God's Hall of Faith. Our name might be mentioned, our name might not be mentioned. We might have our name in no story. We might have our name in lots of verses like some of these guys do. It doesn't matter. But what I want and what I pray and hope for each of you is the same thing. That at the end of the day, God says, you are commended as one who pleased me. And how do we please him? By believing that he exists and that he rewards those who diligently seek him. Walk by faith. Trust him enough to do what he says. And that'll get you in the hall.